Energy strategy versus energy planning, the 18-month divergence. Why the difference will define corporate performance over the next 18 months. Most organizations have an energy plan, fewer have an energy strategy, one built on current infrastructure realities rather than the grid conditions of 3 years ago. The difference between those two things is about to become visible and expensive. There is a distinction worth drawing precisely because it matters more right now than it has in a long time. An energy plan tells you how much energy you'll use, what you expect it to cost, and what your efficiency or renewable targets are. It is an input to financial planning, and most organizations have one. An energy strategy is something different. It incorporates the infrastructure realities that determine whether your energy plan can actually be executed, at what cost, and on what timeline. It asks not just what you want your energy profile to look like, but whether the grid, the contracts, and the capital structures you're relying on can actually deliver it. Most organizations have the former. Fewer have the latter. The gap between them is about to be tested in ways that make the distinction visible. Why energy plans built on 2022 assumptions no longer reflect current grid infrastructure reality. The assumptions baked into energy plans developed in 2022 or 2023 were not unreasonable at the time. Grid access was available in most markets on manageable timelines. Renewable energy procurement through VPPAs was scaling smoothly. Electrification timelines were aggressive but plausible. The cost of capital was different. In 2026, each of those inputs has moved materially. Interconnection timelines for new large loads now run more than 40 months at the median, up from under 12 months a decade ago. Grid congestion is creating basis risk in energy procurement contracts that wasn't adequately modeled when they were structured. The cost of carrying delayed capital projects has increased with the rate environment, and the infrastructure, transformers, substations, transmission capacity that was supposed to keep pace with electrification demand has proven harder and slower to expand than projections assumed. An energy plan built on 2022 assumptions and updated only for price may be telling executive teams that their energy strategy is on track when the underlying infrastructure situation has changed significantly enough to make that conclusion unreliable. How the gap between energy plans and energy strategies is showing up in capital projects. The gap tends to surface first in capital projects. An expansion that assumed grid access in 12 months discovers it requires 30. A decarbonization program tied to an electrification timeline finds that the utility's upgrade schedule pushes delivery 18 months past the target date. A fleet electrification commitment runs into charging infrastructure deployment constraints that weren't modeled as a dependency. In isolation, each of these looks like an execution problem, a project that ran late, a timeline that was optimistic. Across a portfolio, they represent a strategic misalignment. The organization made commitments based on a view of infrastructure availability that has turned out to be incorrect. The consequences compound over time as stranded capital, missed sustainability commitments, and renegotiated financing accumulate. Gartner's 2025 energy risk analysis indicated that power availability was emerging as the primary constraint on AI deployments, with over 40% of data centers projected to be operationally constrained by power availability by 2027. This suggests a significant, continuing lag in senior leadership teams incorporating physical grid access constraints into their strategic planning frameworks. The majority were still treating energy availability as a background condition to be managed by operations, rather than a strategic variable to be modeled at the executive level. What a complete corporate energy strategy includes beyond cost and procurement projections. The organizations getting this right have visibility into their actual grid access position, not just whether utility service exists, but what the capacity situation is at each major facility, what the utility's investment plans are for those service territories, and where they sit in the interconnection queue for any projects in development. They've stress-tested their capital programs and sustainability commitments against scenarios where grid access is delayed 12, 18, 24 months or longer, not as pessimistic edge cases, but as outcomes that current infrastructure data makes plausible. And they've built organizational responsibility for energy access into their governance structure at the CFO and COO level, where capital allocation and operational risk decisions are actually made. Why organizations that build grid access into strategy now will outperform those that don't. The next 18 months will produce visible divergence. Projects that execute on time and on budget, with energy access secured, will increasingly belong to organizations that invested in understanding the constraint landscape before capital was committed. Projects that stall, miss milestones, or require expensive mid-course corrections will increasingly belong to organizations that treated energy as a planning input rather than a strategic variable. The work required to close the gap isn't exotic. It's diligence applied systematically to a variable that most organizations have systematically underweighted. The organizations that start that work now will be meaningfully better positioned when the divergence becomes visible. Those that wait will discover the cost of the gap through their own project outcomes rather than through someone else's case study. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.